Hello, I'm back. Sorry, I want someone was assisting me so that you are able to admit yourself in this forum without necessarily expecting my permission. Thank you for your patience, and kindly don't make such remarks in this platform because this video is going. It's being streamed through the YouTube, so please don't tarnish your name. Just behave well, be good students. More specifically, those who are joining in late and they are unable to log in, kindly Wilson share with them this link. Share with them this link. This is a YouTube link. They'll be able to join in. I've shared. Kindly allow people. I've shared with some people in class. Some people in your class so that they're able to follow the class through the YouTube. Wilson, kindly share the link with your classmate as I continue with the teachings. Now, we were on advantages of anthropology. We have mentioned that through studying anthropology, we are able to have a deep understanding. We are able to also understand people's culture in so many ways. Next, I want us to, the same breath on anthropology. How is it advantageous again? Anthropology, it complements also other sources of information. Anthropology complements other sources of information. When we talk about complementing other sources of information, for example, it is through anthropology that we are able to understand the evolution of man. And by understanding evolution of man, we have to rely more on archaeology as a source of information. So therefore, anthropological way of collecting data complements archaeological source of information, meaning archaeology cannot survive without anthropology, and also anthropology cannot survive without archaeology. And that's why we have defined archaeology as the study of human beings, their origin. How did we know the origin of human beings? We knew the origin of human beings through archaeological activities, through archaeological remains, the artifacts, and etc. Therefore, one of the advantages of anthropology is that anthropology complements other sources of information. Complements, kindly mute. Kindly mute. Whoever is unmuted. Oh, why? Okay. Anthropology complements archaeology, and you need to know that anthropology cannot survive without archaeology. It requires archaeology for an anthropologist to understand the evolution of man, the development of man. The next advantage of anthropology is that anthropology tends to explain why people behave as they do. Why people behave as they do. You'll understand that people behave depending on their context of customs, depending on the context of traditions and social norms. And you'll realize that most of our behaviors are guided, are underpinned by our customs. For example, among the Bokuso, a son-in-law cannot greet a mother-in-law. And that behavior of not greeting a mother-in-law, it is grounded in the customs of the Bukusu community. So, and an advantage role of anthropology is that we are able to understand why people behave in a certain manner. And their behavior is guided by the customs. And I've given an example of a son-in-law who doesn't greet a mother-in-law. And it's because the custom dictates that. And you can only understand that, you can only be able to comprehend that if you live among the Bukusu community. You'll be able to know that this behavior is guided by the custom. This behavior is guided by traditions and social norms and etc. Another example is that maybe among the Luya community, gizzard is not eaten by anyone. It is only eaten by the head of the house, the father. And that is guided by the custom of the society. And that's why you see people have behaviors, different behaviors in the way they serve food and etc. So you ought to understand anthropology tends to explain why people behave as they do, why people behave in a certain way. And this behavior, most of the time, they are dictated by the customs and traditions. Another point is that anthropological information is often very direct. It's very direct. It's very direct in the sense that anthropological information provides first-hand information. Anthropological information also provides an in-depth and reliable data about communities. Anthropological information is very direct and it provides first-hand information, in-depth information, reliable information about communities. Why do we describe that in that manner? Why do we describe anthropology in that manner in terms of its advantage? It's because through anthropology, you are able to interview people. Through anthropology, you are able to participate in ethnography, whereby you participate in their culture, whereby you are able to observe their culture. And that's why you can see another advantage of anthropology is that anthropology is direct, anthropology offers first-hand information, anthropology provides an in-depth and reliable data about communities. Another advantage anthropology is very important because it safeguards and it documents and safeguards knowledge, traditions, language that might otherwise be lost. Anthropology, it documents, safeguards indigenous knowledge, traditions, and languages that might otherwise be lost. Especially in the contemporary period, we are seeing the emergence of technology and also modernization. And we are seeing some people coming in our societies in the name of documenting. Others might document and go away with them without involving the society. And you know, that is a form of neo-colonialism in a way. Because when you document a community's cultural practices, then you don't share with the community. What do we term it? Neo-colonialism of our culture. And right now, as historians, as Africans, we ought to document our own culture through anthropological activities. We ought to safeguard our own indigenous knowledge, traditions, and language so that they cannot be eroded, they cannot be interfered with by external individuals, foreigners, and etc. So anthropology will be of great help, and we can use our gadgets to document and safeguard our indigenous knowledge. By doing this, we are preserving cultural heritage so that in future we do not lose our culture. And there is a Swahili saying that goes, mwacha mila ni mtumwa. Therefore, it is our obligation as Afrocentric scholars, obligation as students to ensure that our cultures are safeguarded, our cultures are protected from being lost. Another important or advantage of anthropology is that When we study cultural activities of various societies, we are able to compare and reveal the similarities and differences of cultural practices in our country and in our counties. So through anthropology, we are able to compare, and also we are able to identify differences of various cultural practices. And by doing that, we are able to appreciate and enlighten ourselves about the historicity of culture. So anthropology enables us to compare differences, compare and identify similarities and differences of cultural practices of various communities. And by doing so, we are able to appreciate these cultures. Another important aspect is that through anthropology, we are able to enlighten ourselves concerning contemporary challenges that affect our communities. Through anthropology, we are able to identify and also inform ourselves regarding contemporary challenges, contemporary problems, and find solutions. That is through visiting a community. When you visit a community, you realize they have so many challenges. Challenges ranging from environmental issues, healthcare issues, educational issues. For example, if you visit a community in northern part of Kenya, you'll realize that they have so many challenges. Lack of good infrastructures, lack of good social amenities such as education and healthcare. And you can only understand that by doing what? By doing an anthropological visit. For example, at some point, I visited Samburu County, that is in Baragoi. In that area, I realized they have so many problems. I went there for an anthropological activity to collect data for my research, my PhD research. And I realized that they have so many problems, ranging from poor roads, lack of social amenities such as enough schools, enough healthcare, and even the schools that were there, they were already destroyed by the bandits. Therefore, you ought to understand that anthropology allows us to interact with the society, and by interacting with the society, we are able to identify the challenges that affect them, and these challenges can range from variety of challenges from conflict, healthcare issues, education, and etc. Now, up to there, I think you can see you have realized that we ought to utilize anthropology as a source of information. And you have seen that anthropology cannot exist alone. Anthropology serves as a complementary source to other complementary source to oral tradition, complementary source to also archaeology. Now, having said that, I want us to look at the disadvantages of archaeology. The disadvantages of anthropology. What are the disadvantages of anthropology? As much as we are saying that anthropology has got so many benefits that we have mentioned, providing in-depth information, providing first-hand information, enabling you to assess problems that are affecting the society. Anthropology allows you to have an interdisciplinary perspective. Anthropology complements other sources of information. Of course, as much as we have the advantages, there is the other side of the coin, which are the disadvantages. So I want us to look at the disadvantages of anthropology as source of as a source of information. Number one, anthropology is time consuming. Anthropology is time consuming. What do we mean by time consuming? Anthropological work requires you to travel over a long period. Over a long distance. Maybe you want to research about the communities in Garissa. You'll travel over 14 hours to go and live among the Somalis so that you can understand their culture. You can understand the culture of people living in Garissa. Therefore, anthropological studies is time consuming. One, in terms of traveling to the fieldwork. Number two, it takes a long time to observe and interact so that you can collect data. It takes a long time for you to interact and observe so that you can collect data. Why is that so? You know, when you visit a community, most of the times you'll find people who are a bit suspicious. We'll find people who are not willing to provide information. So it will take time for you to stay there, observe them, interact with them, understand their beliefs, identify channels that you will use to pave way for you to fit in the society. And that's what makes anthropology time consuming. And it can take as long as 6 months for an anthropological work to be executed. It is not only 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 days. No, a minimum of 6 months. If you stay in a community for a minimum of 6 months, we term that as a successful execution of anthropological activity. So one disadvantage of anthropology is that it is time consuming in terms of traveling to the fieldwork, in terms of taking time to get permission, getting time to observe, getting time to interact with these people so that you cannot collect that, so that you can collect data. So don't think that you'll just visit a community and collect data the way you want. No, it takes time for you to fit in the society for a successful data collection. Number two is that sometimes as an anthropologist, when you're collecting data, you might end up interpreting these people's culture according to your own perspective, according to your own personal cultural biases. And therefore, this can influence the findings. This can influence the way you document the data. And this can influence your conclusion. So sometimes, as an anthropologist, your perception can affect the way you interpret culture. So anthropology as a source of information can be subjective and research bias. So number two, anthropologists can be subjective and research bias, and they can interpret people's culture based on their own perspectives, personal or cultural biases, and which can influence the findings at the end of the day, and can also influence the conclusion, and even it can influence the way you document all this information. And you'll realize sometimes you might be visiting, maybe you are a man from the Luo, Nyanza. You want to document about circumcision. Then you visit the Bukusu community here to document about circumcision. Then you realize that in our community we don't do circumcision. Then you start writing your own. You start writing people's. You start writing information. You start writing the histories of circumcision of the Bukusu based on your own view. So basically, subjectivity comes in. Maybe because you're a Luo and that maybe this cultural activity doesn't happen in your community. So when you meet the Bukusu with their heavy reliance of cultural practices in circumcision ceremonies with so many facets of activities, in circumcision ceremony, you start having your own perception. You start having your personal views regarding what? Regarding circumcision. And that is interference of objectivity in anthropological work, interference of objectivity in documentation of culture. Next, another disadvantage of anthropology is that, anthropology, most of the time, it focuses on a small group of communities. Anthropology focuses on small groups of communities. Therefore, these results that you get from this small group, this culture that you document from small group might not generalize all the communities scattered all over in Kenya. For example, you want to write about the history of maybe the culture of the Bukusu in terms of maybe you can talk of circumcision or bridal ceremony. But now, you're just staying in Bungoma alone, collecting data in Bungoma. But the information you get here might not resonate with the cultural information of the Bukusu community who are living in Kitale. So you ought to understand, anthropology is limited because you're collecting information concerning cultural activity in a small group of communities in a specific region. And you should note that this cultural information you've acquired in a small group in a specific region might not be applicable to other regions, might not be applicable to other communities in a different region. Therefore, that is the limitation of oral tradition. Another limitation is that gaining access to communities. Sometimes it might be very difficult for you to gain access to these communities because some of these communities have sensitive cultural practices. Some of these communities have cultural practices that are not acceptable in the global arena and also in the national arena. So it becomes very difficult and it requires you to even provide them with a consent form. You might also be required to get permission from the NACOSTI, the body that is in charge of research in Kenya. It's known as NACOSTI. So that is a limitation already. Gaining access can be a problematic for you as an anthropologist. Gaining access can be an issue. You will be required to give them consent form. Then we have some communities that are practicing very sensitive cultural practices. For example, the one for female mutilation thing. You see, it's not an easy culture for you to go there and document, because you might even be arrested. So some communities have they normally practice very, very sensitive culture that can be very tricky for you as an anthropologist to document. And again, it can be very tricky for you also to gain access to these people. And therefore, at some point, if it becomes very tricky, as a good anthropologist, you ought to seek permission from the NACOSTI, which is the body which is in charge of research in Kenya, and also you might give a consent form to the respondents or the communities. You tell them in the consent form, you tell them, I'm an anthropologist, I want to research about your culture, kindly give me access, allow me to collect data, and this data that I'm collecting will be solely used for academic purpose, not for any kind of criminal charges or etc. I hope. Are we together up to their class? Yes, are we together?
Yes, we are together.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, you're getting, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you. Another disadvantage, it's about sometimes you can have challenge of resources. Resources can be an issue whereby for you to visit a certain community, for example, you want to research about Somali who are in Mandera. How will you go there? You'll have to use a plane, an aeroplane, and if not an aeroplane, you'll have to board a bus, and it will take you like 20 hours from Kibabi to Garissa or not or Mandera, like 20 hours. You see, you require a lot of money. And for you to travel for 20 hours, you need some very good amount of money. If in case you're using an aeroplane, you need like at least 40,000 or 50,000 for you to go to Mandera and come back. That is just an approximation. So field work as an anthropologist, it is very expensive, and it requires enough money for you to travel to remote areas. It requires you to have financial stability. You cannot just be broke. Then you want to be an anthropologist. My friend, that is impossible. You ought to have a lot of money. And you'll realize that most of the white people tend to venture into anthropology because they have a lot of money. But it's unfortunate Africans, we cannot afford. We don't have enough money to go and stay in a certain community for 6 months just doing a research. And worst of all is that even our government itself, it doesn't have enough money to support research in our universities and other places. Otherwise, you can see it is very expensive, especially in terms of traveling, and also require financial support for you to live in a society comfortably. Wow. There are so many other disadvantages, and I don't want to delve into it. Maybe the last one that you ought to capture is that anthropology is a good source of information. However, there are challenges of miscommunication. Imagine you are visiting a community, a Pokot community in West Pokot. How will you be able to communicate? How will you be able to communicate as an anthropologist? It becomes problematic. So, another disadvantage of anthropology is miscommunication due to language barriers. And when there is communication, just know that there will be barriers. And these barriers can distort information. And these barriers can distort the depth of understanding during the field research. So you can see that anthropological works, as much as it has its advantages, the disadvantages are overwhelming. You can see that. Now, there are so many other issues. I want you to go and read more concerning the disadvantages. We also have the issue of colonial legacies and ethnocentrism. When we talk about colonial legacies and ethnocentrism, this is whereby the early anthropologists were influenced by their own Eurocentric ideas, their own attitude towards our culture. And these Eurocentric scholars, Eurocentric explorers, they documented our culture in their own ways. And even in the contemporary period, they are still doing the same. In fact, recently, I met a Mzungu somewhere in a certain country in Europe. And he was like, I'm an anthropologist and I normally research about Samburu. Then I was like, but you are a white man. How is that possible? And mark you, they are more endowed in knowledge in terms of data collection and also more endowed in knowledge in terms of the culture of African community. So ethnocentrism is an issue because these colonial masters, these explorers, these white men come to Africa to collect data concerning our culture. However, they tend to be affected with their attitude and their perception concerning our culture as Africans. Up to there, any question? Yes? Any question? or any comment concerning what we have discussed? Or
Yes, Doc,
clarification?
I have something
Miss
to add, Doc.
Martina? Yes.
Yeah, we can also say that in anthropology, we might lack the originality in some instances. For example,
Yes.
we can go to study in a community because it entails more of observation and participation. Then the
Yes.
community just acts towards what you need
Good.
to get. For instance, you want to study about something, then you have
Yes.
someone who will be taking you around. Maybe say you have a research assistant. So
Yes.
when they get information that you want to study about something, specific something,
Yes.
then they just
Yeah.
tend to act to please you or for you to get information, and you end up not getting the original information that you had intended to have. Thank
So
you.
what do they con you, or what do they do?
No, like they act according to what you want to know. The originality might not be there exactly.
So they fake.
Yes, they fake. That is it.
I like that. I like that. And that's why that's very good. And let me just clap for you. That is very good. Very good, Makinia. And it's very true because some people in in a specific community might behave in a certain way, and you might end up collecting the wrong information. Some want money from you so that you can collect information from them. They want you to lure them for you to get information. So thank you very much. That is true. And when you lure people so that they can give you information, we tend to distort the originality. And when originality is distorted, now subjectivity comes in. And when you visit a certain community, you'll realize others tend to behave in a different way. They want to conceal their culture. They want to lie. They want to fake. And you end up collecting the wrong information. Thank you so much. Very good. Yes, it's Shadrach. My class is normally open for discussion. Shadrach? Peter?
Yes, now I can add on that.
Yes, Shadrach.
If you see the disadvantages of anthropology, there
Yes.
we have information can become outdated quickly. This
Yes.
is when it is explained further that some societies change fast. So findings from past studies may no longer reflect the current reality. So you see, in some communities, they tend to change their ways, the way they act. So that can make the information become outdated quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. And another thing, Shadrach, we ought to understand that our culture keeps on evolving as the time goes by. And it evolves because of other facets, other external facets, such as modernization, globalization, and etc. And therefore, our culture might be outdated at some point. The culture that we are practicing right now, it is a bit different with the cultural practices that were being practiced in the pre-colonial period and colonial period. That is wonderful. Yes, class, continue with the contribution. Anyone else? Yes? Good. Up to there, I think all of you, Brian, you have raised your hand. Okay. If there is no other comment or question, and if you have understood, I want to appreciate you, and I want to proceed. Yes. Okay. I want to Nixon. Nixon. Okay. Let me proceed to the next source of information, that is archaeology.
Wewe pita bana, funga hiyo kitu bana.
Hello? Hello? Shadrach, what are you saying?
Yeah, I was
Yes.
telling Peter that he should.
Oh, Peter,
Yeah.
now use the appropriate language. I've told you this class is in YouTube. You later hear yourself speaking. Now be careful. And you know YouTube is a public, it's a global platform. Now let's use proper language. Just tell Peter, mute yourself in English. English is the language of instruction. Otherwise, that was good, Shadrach. Next, the next source of information we are going to delve into is archaeology as a source of information. This one is the last one. Archaeology for today, not for today, this is the last source of information. Archaeology as a source of information. Now, what is archaeology? Archaeology is a study of past human societies. Archaeology is the study of past human societies, primarily through their material remains, such as artifacts, structures, tools, and fossils. Archaeology is the study of past human societies, primarily through material remains, such as artifacts, structures, and fossils, to understand how people lived, worked, and organized their communities. To understand how people lived, worked, and organized their communities. You can see there is one thing in common in all these definitions. We want to study about human societies. Now, for us to study human societies by the use of archaeology, we are going to rely on material remains. What are these material remains? Artifacts. What else? Tools. What else? Fossils. So as an archaeologist, you might want to understand how human societies are, especially in the past and in the present. For you to understand how human societies are, you must rely only on material remains. And what are these material remains? Are things like artifacts, structures, tools, and fossils. A good example is the evolution of man. How did scientists came up with the theory of evolution to understand how man evolved? It is because they did an archaeological activity. They undertook an archaeological activity, which enabled them to identify bones, to analyze bones, and by doing that, you are recreating the past histories of man. And when you recreate the past histories of man, you're able to understand where did man originate from. So, parting point for this definition of archaeology is that for you to understand, for you to use archaeology, you must have archaeological skills. And therefore, as an archaeologist, what do you want to do? You want to study the past human societies. And for you to study past human society, you must do that primarily through material remains. And what are these material remains? These material remains are like artifacts, structures, tools, and fossils. And when you study these material remains, you will be able to understand how people lived in the past. You'll be able to understand how communities were organized. Good. Advantages of archaeology. What are the advantages of archaeology? Number one, through archaeology, we are able to understand past civilization. understand and get evidences. We're able to understand and also get evidences of past civilization. We're able to understand and get evidences about past civilization. Number two, we are able to understand and get evidences. It's still under the same point: past civilization, past cultural practices, and historical events that have not been recorded in written ways. So one advantage of archaeology is that we are able to understand and provide evidence of past civilization, cultural practices, and other historical events that have not been written or recorded. For example, I think you have ever heard about the Egyptian civilization. You have ever heard about Chinese civilization. How did people knew that Chinese civilization existed? It is through artifacts, it is through fossils that they were able to know that Chinese civilization existed, Egyptian civilization existed. And for example, if one day you happen to visit Egypt, you realize that they have so many, they have preserved some of the they have preserved some of the equipments, fossils that existed in the ancient civilization of Egypt. And you'll note that even there is mummification, and mummification is whereby the dead bodies were mummified during the ancient Egypt. They are preserved, and those are evidences that point out to the existence of ancient civilization of Egypt. And also cultural practices. For example, you want to research about a certain cultural practices that a practice that maybe went extinct. You'll go to a certain community and you start excavating, identifying where these communities were inhabited, identifying the activities taking place, identifying the exact place. When you identify the exact place, you'll be able to carry an execution whereby you dig to get some fossils. And when you get those fossils, you'll be able to analyze. You'll be able to analyze this kind of fossil, this kind of artifact was used for this site. This is the place where people were praying. For example, we want to assess the history of the Agikuyu. You will delve into the Agikuyu community. They'll take you to a site where they used to pray to a Mugumo tree. And that's how you'll be able to understand that this activity took place here. They worship their gods under Mugumo tree. And therefore, archaeology allows you to understand cultural practices. And I've given you an example of the praying under Mugumo tree as a belief of the Agikuyu community, and it is part of their cultural belief. Number two is that the importance of archaeology. Another advantage is that through archaeology, and I think archaeology, it is the only source that allows us to put cultural activities in their timeline. It is the only source that allows us to put or to place cultural activities in their timeline. For example, we have various ways of periodization in archaeology. We have absolute periodization and relative periodization. So through archaeology, we are able to put or to place cultural activities in their timeline. And also we are able to understand the development of societies, development of technologies, development of cultures over time. So one thing you need to know is that archaeology allows us to periodize various cultural practices, to periodize evolution of technologies, to periodize the evolution of cultures. Another advantage is that through archaeology, we are able to preserve the knowledge that went extinct. Through archaeology, we are able to preserve the knowledge that went extinct, or the knowledge that was forgotten, or the knowledge that was not written. Why? Because the archaeologists can excavate. They can excavate a region, and they can even excavate a grave so that we can understand the burial ceremonies, burial activities, burial grave goods for specific communities. And apart from excavating, we are able to identify buildings, monuments through archaeology. Some of the monuments were forgotten. Some of these monuments went extinct. The forgotten cultural practices. And therefore, archaeology is very, very useful in terms of preserving knowledge and also preserving monuments, preserving communities, cultures that were forgotten. Complementary, archaeology as a complementary source of information. Archaeology relies on other sources of information. Archaeology relies on anthropology as a source of information. You cannot just go to a community and start digging, excavating, without interacting with the community, without understanding the culture of a community through anthropological study. It is impossible. So, archaeology complements other sources of information. It complements anthropology, whereby as an anthropologist, at some times you might want to visit a monument and get fossils. And as an anthropologist, you might want to understand the community better. And for you to understand, you might rely on archaeology. Therefore, archaeology is an important complementary source of information, not only to anthropology, but also to oral tradition and other sources of information. How many points are those, class? Yes, class?
I have captured 4.
Who has more?
I have 4.
4. Who else? Who has 5? Okay. Let me give you the 5th one, and the rest you can research. Through archaeology, we are able to analyze settlements pattern. Through archaeology, the same point, we're able to analyze settlement patterns of various communities, whereby you focus on analyzing where did they move from, analyzing their tools, analyzing where they settled, the fossils available, the monuments available, and also through archaeology in the same point, when you analyze the settlement of people, you're able also to analyze the past climate, landscape, and human environmental interaction. So archaeology is very important for us because it enables us to understand why people settled in a specific place, where did they settle, and also which type of climate did they experience in a specific period. Now, I want us to finish by looking at the disadvantages. Disadvantages of archaeology. 1, some artifacts and sites may be destroyed. Some artifacts and sites may be destroyed, lost, or never discovered. Some artifacts may be destroyed, lost, or never discovered. And when artifacts are destroyed, lost, or never discovered, what happens? It distorts the historicity of culture. It distorts the past. It doesn't give the exact information concerning the past because already the materials are affected. The materials are destroyed. Now, how will we be able to capture the real or the exact historicity of event? It becomes an issue. Number two, another disadvantage. Excavation and preservation of artifacts, fossils, and etc., all those other facets of archaeology requires you to have enough time, requires you to have enough labor, it requires you to have enough finances. So excavation and preservation, it is time consuming and cost intense. Why? You as an archaeologist, you're required to have enough time because there are so many steps that archaeologists follow to ensure that they excavate the correct site, to ensure that they are reconstructing the correct culture. And this also requires you to have enough people on the ground who will be able to assist you in terms of data collection, in terms of analysis of fossils and other materials. And for you to utilize enough labor, you need to have enough financial resources so that you're able to pay the laborers. Another disadvantage, when you are excavating or when excavation is taking place, there are risks. You might end up damaging or destroying destroying the artifacts. You might end up destroying the fossils. So that is also another disadvantage of archaeologists. I think that is self-explanatory. Then lastly, sometimes it might be very difficult for archaeologists to establish the exact age for artifacts, establish exact ages for artifacts. It can be an issue, it can be a problem, because you'll realize some artifacts are damaged, some artifacts have already decomposed. So getting or establishing the exact date can be an issue. And as I was introducing this topic, I mentioned that archaeology allows us to get the exact date in which a culture existed. Exact date or absolute relative date. And therefore, you can see sometimes it is difficult to establish the precise ages of these artifacts because some of these artifacts might be destroyed by what? By decomposition. Some of them can be damaged. And up to there, I think I've said a lot regarding archaeology, and the rest I leave it up to you to do more research and also give me more points regarding the same. Because when exam is set, you're not told, give me only 5. It can be more than 5. It can be 10. It can be 6. So do more research. Now, up to there, any question? Yes, any question regarding archaeology? Hello, class. Any question? If you have a question, just unmute and speak. Have you understood class? Mmeelewa kweli?
Tuko sawa.
Okay. If you have understood, I want to appreciate you for joining. Yes, Titus? Okay, if you have understood, I want to appreciate all of you for joining this class within a short period of notice that I gave today in the morning. Hopefully, we can have another online class before we meet. Probably we will meet next week on Monday. I'll make sure that I'm there early enough so that they don't overtake us. Otherwise, maybe we can organize for a class either on Thursday. Yeah, most likely, Thursday is okay for me. Organize for an online class on Thursday so that we can push this syllabus. Otherwise, thank you. I appreciate you, comrades, for joining this class and for cooperating and also for listening to me. Thank you and have a good day.
Good day, too.
Okay.
No.
Umi anaongea kwa mimi naini mtafika. Anafaa tufundishe usiku.
Class nzuri. Class nzuri. Wewe nini? Hakuna kazi. Kuna kazi. Hakuna kati iko. Kati iko.
Kiswahili presentation Joan.
Kati iko next
Kati gani yenye iko?
next week.
Next week kuga?
Next week Wednesday.
Kati ya
Kwani hujasikia akisema hapo?
Wamesema Thursday. Wamesema Thursday.
Thursday next week.
Hii wiki.
After lesson ya Monday.
Hii wiki tena.
Simuongee vizuri kwa pika.
Hawajataja mahali pakaa.
Useme.
Vile kama kwa attend class na
Kati na mtu ni. Sawa watu kweli. Nani yako na nini?
Wewe.
Nani yako na nini?
Sizeni hapa.
Nani yako na notes anitumie? Lakini hawa watu ni wakubwa. Nimesema tuta next alikuwa amesema ni Monday. Sasa
Religion 111.
Nasema religion. Umesema lakini wewe si tuliweka hiyo nikasa. Hii ndio hiyo ya sana. Nani nani? Ndio. Hata mimi.